Welcome back. We are so glad you're here today. Today, we are going to be talking about an invisible force that every single human on Earth experiences called resistance. So before we dive into that, hello, Mama Judy.
Hi, Jill. And yes, I've been feeling resistance, so this is perfect.
Okay, good to know. And so I think a great place to start would be, can you tell us, Mama Judy, what does resistance mean? Where did the word come from? Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Okay, well, we'll narrow it down to more of the creative resistance, but I'm going to start at the human DNA.
Okay.
Humans are somehow in our evolution, they're hardwired that resistance is part of us, because what the body is trying to do in resisting change is protect us from pain. That's the big global human psychology of resistance. On the creative level, that can be narrowed down to the fact that, for example, when I said I've been feeling resistance, I noticed that when I go to start, let's say, a new technique in a total different medium, I feel an energy of resistance about beginning. And what I find myself doing, and this is so easy to do, I'll go dust. I'll go fold the clothes. I mean, trust me, housework normally does not make the top of my excitement list. But when it comes to, I've been thinking about this, and when it comes to the pain of starting something new, which is putting your vulnerability out there, it's like I have a hard time sometimes breaking through to start. And so I go back to what's known and what's comfortable. And that kind of fits in with what humans do, what our hard wiring does.
Okay, I have two questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I have two questions on that. So first, I love the fact that you said it's part of our DNA because it was to protect us from change.
Correct.
Now, so what would that look like? Like, why is change a bad thing? And even back when it first started, I understand now, like I can understand that maybe fear is driving resistance or, some of those type of things. But what is the problem with change?
Well, change means you have to put yourself out there into the unknown. And human beings do not like the unknown. We want the known. So we're comfortable in the known. So when change comes along, you have to put yourself into an environment that you don't know anything about. And in creativity, what happens with resistance? To me, it's almost like the big force that allows things like self-doubt, procrastination, criticism, I'm not good enough, all of those things to psychologically creep in, that sneaky snake voice. But it's that big umbrella, if I can use that word, of resistance to change, that then these little voices fill in to keep us from doing something that we might really want to do, but we just can't quite get there.
Yeah. And when you say that, I am experiencing resistance right now. I would not have known it until you just said it, because where I'm sitting today, recording our podcast today. I'm in my studio. So you can't see it, but right down here, the table that my computer's sitting on, but right down here, I'm going to show you. Okay. It is. So if you're on YouTube, I'm tilting the computer. It's just, everything's piling up. It is a mess. I know there's a little spot in the middle, but that right there is causing me to, when I come in here, I feel overwhelmed and I go back out.
Okay.
So I'm feeling resistance to create because I've allowed this to pile up. And it's like I've procrastinated. I've procrastinated on getting this in order because I'm overwhelmed. And now I really am feeling resistance to create because I'm stuck and I feel like this all has to get done before I can really create. And so I did not even think about it till you just said it now.
You know, Jill, we talk about a lot of this in different ways. And we've touched on things like this in other terms. And I hadn't thought about the word resistance either. Excuse me. But just like you, as I begin to examine, why am I feeling this way? Why can't I do this? Why is it easier for me to run off and find any excuse not to sit down at my paint table, my easel, and begin what I want to begin? And I realize I am resisting it. And the only thing I can think of, and that's what made me start examining this a little bit more, is there's got to be psychologically, emotionally, something that resistance is trying to do. And so when I did my research, that's what I found out. Resistance is to keep us away from, it thinks it's doing us a favor. It's to keep us from psychological, physical, and emotional pain. And you know, when you put yourself out there to try something new, you feel vulnerable. You feel like, oh, I'm not good enough. Or what if this fails? What if I'm just a horrible painter? All of those things suddenly show up. And that's because resistance has allowed them to.
Right. And one of the things that you mentioned too about the self-doubt and the little inner critic voice saying, you know, who do you think you are and all that? That does remind me of what we've talked about way back in episode 6 when we talked about the imposter syndrome, because that is a big part of it too. But like you said, resistance kind of has this umbrella thing. But I was sort of wondering before we talked about this today, I was thinking, well, resistance and imposter syndrome are kind of similar. And so I pulled up something. Can I just read in case someone else in the audience is thinking like, isn't this just the same thing as imposter syndrome? I want to read a little bit that I pulled up.
Oh,
is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So what you've just talked about, you've already described what resistance is. So I'm just going to say imposter syndrome, on the other hand, so separate from resistance, is the feeling that you're not truly qualified for the work you're doing or the success you've achieved, despite evidence of your competencies. And I know we said that when we did our episode on imposter syndrome, but I kind of forgot because I just got these lumped in together, the resistance and imposter syndrome. It's the same thing. They're coming at you and speaking the little voices in your head, but they're different because many things, like you said, if you're trying a new technique, you're having that resistance because you don't already have the competencies. You can't say, well, what am I doing? I am a good painter. I know that already. It's already been proven, or I can show myself that.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, when you're doing anything that requires change, what does that feel like in your body?
It feels new, hard, uncomfortable.
Okay, you've just hit upon it. Resistance. The purpose of resistance in the human being is to protect us from the discomfort of change. That's why it's so nice to stay in the status quo. You stay there, you're not in pain, you know what's familiar, all of that. So it's almost like you use the word force, this invisible force. So if I can paint an image, let's think of resistance in front of an army, and it's got this big battering ram that kind of pushes back against any kind of change. And behind that wall, that battering ram, are all these little minions like procrastination, self-doubt, imposter syndrome. They're all behind resistance.
Oh, wow. What a great visual. That helped me a lot.
Good. If you look at the status quo, for example, What you have is a long-standing pattern of habit. And I'll use myself. I've mentioned before how comfortable it is for me to go in and do my little grungy art journal pages. I try out techniques. I don't have to worry about whether one page is successful. I'm very, very comfortable doing it. So when I decided to start following an artist that does little tips on how to paint, I noticed that it was like going to the dentist. It wasn't fun to sit down with that paintbrush in hand and follow the lessons. I was not comfortable because, again, I'm in the unknown. I don't know whether I'm going to be successful. If I show it to anybody, are they going to tell me, oh, you better go back to something else?
Right.
So we've used different terms, but what I was hoping when we talk about resistance is just to make people self-aware that we're all dealing with it, and it's a human thing, and we can overcome it, but really to examine themselves. Am I experiencing resistance? Is that what's keeping me from doing what I want to do? Because it's through two things, and I've read this in several places. In fact, I just read it this morning on an Instagram page where the artist said, "Today I'm open and curious." Well, the way you overcome resistance is awareness and curiosity. You have to be aware when resistance is playing its part in your art. If you find yourself thinking about going to do something new, but all of a sudden folding socks is more appealing, that might be resistance. If you find taking out the garbage is more fun than sitting down at your new project, yeah, you're dealing with some resistance.
Yes.
So the first step is to just understand it's there. All of us go through it at some time. And the other thing that will help overcome it is curiosity. Like when we were kids, we've referred to this many times. Stay open like a child. They don't worry about whether or not it's good. They just do it.
Right.
So if we can learn to always be curious and stay aware of when resistance, don't beat yourself up, but just, oh, look, I normally don't do this. I wonder if this is my way of not going to an uncomfortable place.
Right. And then also, so you acknowledge that it's happening and then pushing through. And I'm thinking of that battering ram, like pushing against the resistance. You've got to push through in order to keep going and then, have fun or, see something that you really like that you just created or something to get to that next level. So you got past the change and now you're like, okay, I've moved on. You're seeing a little bit of positive momentum.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, we talked about just a moment ago about what it feels like when you come up against resistance. It's uncomfortable. You're not excited. But when you're in a creative space, when you're open and flowing and gotten past resistance, it's excitement. You're excited to be there. You're excited to do this. So those two things, those two ways of feeling are very inherent and go back and forth in the creative process. Rick Rubin, who we've referenced before, talked about a block, an artist block, being that not necessarily that you've lost your creativity, because creativity's always out there. You've just chosen to step back. But like you said, Steve Pressfield in his books talks about resistance as causing the artist block. So between those two authors, we have two different ways of looking at something as simple as the artist block. And that's why another reason why when we talk about similar things with different words and come at it from a different way, it's all good. It's all the same thing. It's all wrapped up in the creative process. But we sometimes need to hear and understand things differently before it resonates with me, just like the battering ram. If that helped you understand what resistance is, now you know it emotionally as well as perhaps intellectually.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I think too, tell me, I don't know why this word just popped in my head, but I was thinking about you mentioned change, but evolve.
Yes.
That word just came to mind. And I thought evolve is kind of a way that smashes down that resistance also, right? As we evolve, if we allow ourselves to evolve, which means to change, instead of having that resistance to change as we evolve. I don't know why. That was just an interesting word that literally just popped into my head.
Well, it's a perfect word right now, because as you overcome resistance, and while we're talking about that, let me just say that resistance also is the beginning of the process of new creativity. Now, that sounds counterintuitive to what I've just said.
Right.
But if you think about it, resistance, and you take that step to overcome it, getting past resistance means you've changed even a little bit. Your art has changed even a little bit. So as you move beyond resistance, you're trusting more, you're evolving more, your work is changing, but it starts with resistance, with overcoming resistance. So evolve is the perfect word, because that's what you're doing by overcoming resistance.
Right. I think I'm going to write that word and put it around here on my desk somewhere.
Yes.
So
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm going to put resistance in front of me to help me remember when I begin to, those same feelings that, oh, I don't want, maybe I'll go straighten the front room up. I want to identify what's really behind that. Was I thinking of going and painting, and all of a sudden that sounded more appealing? It's, it takes 90 days to make a new habit. So if we identify resistance, we are not going to overcome it in one fell swoop. It's going to take tiny little steps of evolution.
Right.
And 90 to 100 days to go beyond and establish the habit that you've started with overcoming resistance. I don't ever want anybody to think that, oh, if I identify it, I'm done. That's only the beginning.
Right. Yeah. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier when I mentioned the mess that my desk is, the resistance is because I want to clean this desk because I want to try out some painting, which, I haven't painted barely anything, but I want to clear my space out just to make some pages for journals and do some painting. But all this stuff needs to be cleared away. That was my resistance. I forgot to mention earlier. So someone listening, it could just be that you keep not cleaning your desk area or whatever, because you're trying to clear space for that next creative endeavor you're going to be. Because right now everything is stitching related. So I can sit down here and stitch. But what I really want to do is clear my space so that I can try something new. And that is exactly what's been going on. And we've just named it.
And that's true. It's just like me getting up and dusting. And I mean, literally, that's what I was doing. And there is, all of us can deal with a certain amount of clutter. I function and always have. I was that person whose desk looked like, a bomb went off, but I knew where every piece of paper was. Somebody who has to be neat and orderly approaches things differently. But here's where you have to be careful, just like you mentioned. You have to be careful that your need for order and cleanliness is not an excuse, resistance, for going and doing what you want. So even something as simple as tidying up your workspace, great. I even need to tidy up mine. But how often do you do it? Do you do it every time you think of a new project?
No.
It's awareness again.
Right. Yes. Okay, great. That makes sense. So when you, and before we wrap up, when you were just experiencing it, so you have self-examined this with the painting. Is this just a very new realization, or did you already overcome that resistance and did you paint something new, or are you about to?
Probably all of the above. Okay. So we've touched on this type of thing in different ways, like we said. And like I've said in prior podcasts, I am extremely thinking self and life philosophically. And this idea of resistance just kind of, it was like the aha moment where you go, oh, maybe that. And that then triggered me to do more research into it and to find out, yeah, this is a normal human thing and part of the process. Okay. So with that in mind, what I'm doing now is I'm still going to take one step at a time in the painting. I'm going to learn and be comfortable. There's that word again, comfort, with one aspect of the painting. I'm going to quit in the back of my mind without realizing that, thinking I have to be Van Gogh in the first painting I paint. I'm going to quit setting myself up for failure with these high expectations. And that all happens internally without being aware of it. So I'm working on that. I have been painting more and doing things much more outside my comfort zone, but I'm going to be more aware of it. And I think that's going to help me tremendously be comfortable with that process. And it probably goes back, like we said one time before, where you always have somebody from the external say something and it stays in your mind. And mine was the art assistant that taught the drawing class. That voice is probably lurking back there where my resistance says, ooh, that was painful. Don't want to go there again. So let's not even start in that direction.
Right. And if you didn't listen to the podcast episode, what Mama Judy is referring to is an art assistant that told her that she shouldn't be doing the art. Like she should just wrap it up and go do something else.
Right. And I'll bet you everybody out there has someone at some time that's made a comment that's still in their psyche.
Yep. Well, and I think one thing interesting for those listening, one thing I could say that would come from this is to, like you said, be aware of the resistance and then start taking small steps to move forward and create and evolve and all that. But also one thing that we both said that's very different is, as we all experience these things that are just natural to being a human and being creative, call it what it is, or put a word out there. You said you're going to write resistance. I'm going to write evolve. So we just chose two different words and different approaches, but it's still to acknowledge what's happening or what could be or something. I think that's a helpful thing for us to write down what's happening, or write down an aspirational word or something like that to help us, to remind us of things as they pop up.
Absolutely. That's it. That's part of that awareness.
Yes.
Those words that we are going to use, they're just going to remind us. They're going to make us aware. And it occurred to me too, Jill, that another way, if someone is feeling this, if this resonates with someone and they do make journal pages or even stitch, put those words that come up into your work.
Yes. I've seen that a lot. Val has put words in there. Megan, there's a lot of people that I see that they stitch words or just have a cutout word or write the word on into their work.
Right.
Really nice.
And it's okay to acknowledge even the words that aren't our best friends.
Right.
Evolve is our best friend. Resistance, not so much, but we still need to give it its place, its due. It's there for a purpose, but it takes its job too seriously sometimes.
I love thinking about that.
It does.
Well, and I hope that us even being on this podcast and others that are watching, we sometimes say, we'll be your accountability partner. But Mama Judy, I'm going to ask that you be my accountability partner. So to push through that resistance for me, for the painting, I just need to tidy up a few things. I'm not going to let that be anything that's stopping me permanently, but I just don't want to get paint everywhere on my threads. So sometimes it helps to have accountability to be able to push through resistance because you kind of put it out there into the world. And that does help me. So I'm going to use you for that, please.
You bet. And, because painting, again, is a vulnerable area for me. I'm not ready to go flashing them around, but I will show you.
Okay.
So you're my account. Even if we don't use the word accountability partner.
Yes.
I guess the bottom line is I trust you enough in this new part of my journey to show it to you before I'm ready to show other people.
Well,
and trust is a big part of our creative journey.
That is. And thank you for being vulnerable in that way. And for me, all I need, this isn't really vulnerable because I'm probably not going to share much of it, but I just know that you're going to want me to evolve. So you're going to text me and say, did you get that done yet? Like, I know that you care, that this is important to me. And so we're kind of looking at it a little bit different ways, but yes, works great.
Yep. So I hope everybody out there that listened to this will find something that resonates with them, that then, like you said, Jill, can take one small step to overcoming resistance to whatever it is. And maybe even keep track of their own evolution, because they will, as any of us get beyond the resistance, we'll see the changes in our work. Well, and we take small steps.
Yes. And one episode that aired last week with Wanda talked about how you can use Instagram as a visual archive type thing when you're ready. But that is a place where for sure you can go back and say, wow, look how I remember I pushed through. And that was my first time I ever did decide to share XYZ or whatever for all of us. But that's a neat visual representation too, or in a little journal. I sometimes just jot down things that I'm working on in a little journal, and it's fun to look back and go, oh my gosh, I was fretting about this on this creative journey, and here I am doing something totally different, or that was so much fun and I've evolved since then.
Very good.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This was fun. Mama Judy, thank you for bringing this idea to all of us, because I learned a lot today myself, and I hope all of our listeners do as well.
And I did too in my research.
Okay. And we look forward to seeing whatever painting that you put out there to the wide world at some point down the road, maybe. But if not, text me pictures.
I will. All right. All right, everyone. Thank you all. Love you, Jill.
Love you too, Mama Judy. Talk to you later.